Right in the middle.
John has out-angled me for over a decade. Literally longer than that, where people are like, oh, I thought you were a size medium. I'm like, I am not a medium. I weigh 235, I'm 6'2", and they're like, well, next to John, you're a medium. So I figured it out. So guess who's the medium today? This guy.
Kelly's the type of guy, when he smells blood in the water, he'll go for it. I had, I wasn't kidding, I was sleeping on his couch, and he's like, hey, let's go into my basement and do some floor pressing. So we're in the basement, and I got my leg is locked out of surgery the day after, and we're in there trying to floor press with my legs up, and I think he got me, and he fucking smelled blood in the water, so he'll take anything he can get. He's like, it is injury, let's floor press. Let me find something that I can do really well while you're beat up. And so that's
one-legged pogo jumps, go.
Exactly, he's like, we're in. Hey guys, thanks for coming. You guys got to see some awesome stuff, a little bit of Rob sprint stuff, which you're going to see more tomorrow when we actually get out on the track. So this was the prep. You got to hear Kelly, and we were going to tag team, and then he just went monk.
Sorry.
If you guys have seen Zoolander.
I'm sorry.
And got into hip flexion. He was sweating. He was kneeling. He was jumping around. And I'm smart enough when somebody's having their moment to just stand back and keep my mouth shut and let greatness happen. So Kelly got up there and crushed it, and I mean, Duffin and I were kind of we're not even gonna add anything. He's on a roll, don't stop him. And but yeah, we got to do that, and then I know Nick and Xanis were down in there working with you guys, so you guys got a little bit of preview. So what we're gonna do a little bit is, I wasn't kidding, the very first CrossFit football seminar, and there really wouldn't have been a power athlete if that hadn't happened, involved these two guys. Raph, like I said, trained me and was my coach and worked with me for my NFL career, and then Kelly, who I met I think CrossFit Games, and it was kind of one of those things after 2 minutes, it's how come we haven't been friends longer? And started our friendship. And I remember when I originally got pitched the idea of CrossFit football, you guys have heard me say, I'm like, it's a terrible fucking idea. This name is awful. And Greg Glassman was like, no, it's great. People are gonna get it because you played football. And I'm like, it's a terrible idea. Nobody's gonna get it. And we launched that website, and the first day we got 17,000 hits. And then they called me hysterical, you have to put on a seminar. And I didn't know how to put on a seminar, so all I did was I called the coolest people I know and be like, you guys want to come teach some stuff and see what it looks like? I ended up, and Chris still laughs about this, I had a video or a CD burned of run drill, a bunch of run cut-ups that I would watch in the off season, and because they would send us a bunch of film to watch in the off season. I made people watch football plays, run plays, literally with you guys have seen football coaches with the pointer and the red light thing. I made people watch it, trying to think that if I made them watch end zone and sideline film, we could somehow teach them to be athletic. That was how bad it was. And I remember thinking, and people are like, why the fuck are we watching football? And it's it's CrossFit football, we're gonna watch football, of course. But this was the splinter in our mind, and it was something that Raph, for years, we talked about it, is why are some people able to do something that others can't? What becomes that that piece, that crux, that deal where all of a sudden somebody goes from being good to great? And the cool thing about the NFL, is there's a real interesting hierarchy of really good players. And then there's a whole bunch of players that aren't very good. My wife thinks this is hysterical, where I'm like, yeah, that guy was dog shit. He was awful. She's like, but he's a starter in the NFL. I'm like, yeah, but there's a hierarchy. And the best guys in the world are there because they can do these things. And after you do the job long enough, you start trying to figure it out. And then you meet people like Raph, who have trained, Olympic baseball players, which we don't always talk about, but all these different athletes. And then you have a guy like Kelly, who's trained even more diverse of an athlete. Raph worked as a U.S. Olympic swim strength coach, so he's working with swimmers, which is totally not within the realm of what he does, but because his stuff applies. Kelly, you've worked with everybody from professional, fucking, what's his name, Gerard Butler, Texas favorite movies, Something's on Fire. They call Kelly to work on his elbow. He's working with professional athletes. Is there a sport that you haven't worked with?
We're getting there. There's still a few things. Cricket, but I have some friends who are playing Indian, for the Indian League. And it's the same thing over and over again. I think if one of the things that John and Raph identified early on was that there are principles underneath high-level performance. And if you stop worrying about what the application is and you look at the shapes and the demands of the body underneath that, you suddenly have the key that unlocks everything. I coached 2 people at the Olympics in rowing this year. You know, I'm not a rower. You know, I have bobsleigh athletes. We see everything, but it really comes down to when you strip away that, it really is. Can you do these things? Can you do them quickly? Can you maintain your efficiency? And it's the same. The shoulder is the shoulder and always has been. So when you find this universality and people are asking you to apply the principles that you're learning, you will be able to reapply it to your sport over and over again.
Yeah, so that original seminar, it was, I think Kelly and I did the warm-up. We got into lifts, let Roth do his sprint stuff, and I remember we got done, and I remember we met up and we're like, what do you think? And we're like, I don't know, you think it was, people liked it? And then the bunch of the people that came went back and talked to CrossFit HQ, and basically Kelly got his own seminar the next day, right? For no other reason that they were nervous about us joining forces. And they were like, we got to peel these people away. And Juliet, who's Kelly's wife, still's like, dude, if I hadn't sent Kelly down there to do that, who knows what would have happened. And then the mobility project started, a mobility WOD, and now it's evolved Supple Leopard into what he's done. It's really amazing to see, but it was cool to feel like we were at that point where we saw fire strike, and just to watch it explode has been so cool.
If I may, one of the things I'd love to do up here is definitely talk about what you're seeing and what you're feeling and some of the questions for these geniuses. But the world has changed a lot in 15 years. Even 10 years ago, we're seeing an order of sophistication of you. If you guys teleport yourself back 10 years and I dropped you in 15 years ago, you would look like the greatest genius coaches on the world. You could even feel insecure about your skills the way you are right now. But you are so sophisticated, and the tools and tactics and you're understanding the depth that you present with today is so much greater than anything we could have hoped for 10 years ago. What that means is some of the decisions we made are often not viewed through the lens of where were we 15 years ago, where were we 10 years ago. We were taking a lot of slack out of the system, a lot of low-hanging fruit, and things for hearing it for the first time. And conversely, the other side of that is we need to make sure that we're asking what next. If we're really starting to firm up our base, how do we expand our roles of coaches? What are the next sets of problems we can take on? Because we are really good. John is a genius programmer. He's always been good at programming, but now he's a whole set of reps. You know, you guys are part, actually, I don't know if you know this, and I'm sorry to give away the secret.
I know.
You're part of a secret, ninja camp where you're just grist for the machine. John is just testing on you all the time. That's all. You're just part of a big experiment. And our model's been test, retest, share. And if we can really start to solve this set of problems, how can we go then into swimming and revolutionize swimming? How can we go ask who's responsible for pain? How are we going to take that on? How are we going to pick up the slack when someone's been discharged from rehab? How can we regress and progress the things that we're doing? Those are the next sort of opportunities. How do we think of this at a population level? And those are the things that I think we're ready as a coaching group to have the next convo.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one was, when people come in, there was this idea of, do you have a base level of fitness? Are you fit enough to be able to do the amount of work we know in a given day? And that was, just a basic conversation that you even think about today. Somebody walks through and you're like, wow, you've never lifted weights? You've never done any of this stuff? That was something we were encountering 15 years ago where we were like, holy shit, people had never pressed a bar overhead, didn't know how to pull a deadlift off the ground, and you're like, shit, what's the minimal input for maximal return? And it was so low that anything we did was considered fire. I remember going in and people literally trying to get up and leave and fight us when we're trying to teach a toes forward model in the squat. And now it's we've to the point where we beat on this and there was no breaking. And what about, no, it's no, it doesn't move that way. And then we show the force bleed demos, the change of directions, all of that stuff. We've harped on that, and now all of a sudden I'll see people Stan Efforting the other day was I pulled my deadlifts a lot better with my toes forward. Or my toes in this position, and he's getting in, and people are like, wow, this is revolutionary. And I'm like, I sent it to Kelly, I'm like, holy shit, dude. These are fights that we fought for years. Raph, you remember us going to the seminar, and people standing up and arguing with us and being like, all right, let's do the force bleed demo. Let's do change of direction. You do it your way, you do it our way. And then they're like, well, that's sprinting. It's well, why are we lifting weights? And that was a huge one for me, for explaining to people, and they're like, well, what do you mean, why are we lifting weights? I'm like, well, why are we lifting weights? If it's not to prepare you guys for the demands of sport, which don't involve lifting those weights, it looks like moving through space. which is going to be many more pounds per square inch than we're going to ever do with this stuff. So we're reinforcing these movement patterns. And then we ran into like, well, why can't you do this? Well, I'm tight in my hips, I'm tight here, and now we get into this whole thing where now everybody's stretching and trying to get really flexible in this active or passive range of motion. And then they have zero range of motion and active range of motion. And so now you're in this like constant fight, and we were really fortunate teaching CrossFit football is we had the ability, and Kelly did the same thing with was it CrossFit Mobility? CrossFit Mobility. We got the chance to go out and work with tens of thousands of athletes over the course of a decade in real time. Show up, meet people you never went, put them through the model, get out in 2 days, and then go on to the next one. So when we talk about seeing as many people as we have, I don't know how we replicate that piece. I mean, think about how many, you start talking about PT and you're like, I've literally put my hands on thousands, tens of thousands of people. And things, when you start seeing that happen, it starts happening in real time.
Well, I would say the interesting part for me was when the natural shift where we started to realize that if somebody wasn't in position to receive a message, that was the fight that we were fighting.
Yeah.
If you go in and I immediately MF you and spit in your face and call your mom a name, you are not going to want to receive my message, no matter what it is. And the early days, we were Hulk smash. It's hey, we train athletes and blah blah blah.
It was basically our way or the highway, and we're going to fucking demolish you. And all it did, and Rob made a good point. Like we probably broke a lot of eggs making those omelets.
But it was interesting because, and I was just telling Tex, a very influential person that came to one of our seminars called me 12 years later, and he was like, hey, is Raph there? And I was like, hey, this is him. And he goes, he told me who he was, I'm not gonna say his name, and he goes, I just want to apologize. And I was like, why, what'd you do? And he goes, I don't know if you remember, but I sat in the back, and the moment you opened your mouth and said your first statement, I spit on you. And he was like, I didn't want to hear a single thing you had to say. Everything went in one ear out the other. In fact, I sat back there and I was just blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I wasn't ready to receive that message at that point in my career. And he goes, 10 years later, he goes, I'm sitting there thinking, God, I should have paid attention. What he's doing makes sense. And it was an eye opener for me, because it was like, you know what? We need to do a better job of helping people receive that message, or a message, whatever that might be.
Well, the other thing too is we were working in a community of people that had subscribed to almost like a form of dogma. Like there was an ideology that they were soaked into, and when you start talking about things that might show the weak lug nuts or the loose lug nuts on that machine, then all of a sudden people took it as an offense, as an attack on them. And I think what we looked at it is like, hey, here's a training system. Systems are always going to have issues. You ask Christoph, an engineer, like we were talking about his war rig, he's got all these systems, and I get anxiety because of all the problems that are going to go wrong. When I say I put too many systems together, they never play nice. So when you have a system, it takes intelligent people like engineers to try to bang on the systems and figure out where the problems are. And then when you have an opportunity to train and work with the people that are doing this, and everybody has the same dysfunction, which is what Kelly saw when he went to mobility, everybody had the same dysfunction. All of a sudden you have to go back to the source and be like, well, everybody's following this ideology. Now there could be holes or problems within it. And then when we start having more nuanced discussion, a lot of people aren't ready to kind of give up. I mean, I've always made the joke, somebody reposted it recently, which kind of embarrassed me a little bit, but I made a joke that CrossFit was like a cult, but it was a good cult because we were getting people more fit. I mean, in a lot of ways, people were subscribing to it like a religion. This is what I do. This is where I go on Sunday. These are my friends. This is what I believe in. Increased work capacity, broad time, modal domains is what I hang on the wall.
When did most people, even not just within cross football, but when do most people, that light bulb clicks, and when are they really ready to receive that message?
Well,
I would say it's...
I think what happened for a lot of people is if you're training grandma or the average person, 40-year-old, 35-year-old professional comes in who just wants to be somewhat fit, it was great for that. But then all of a sudden you bring in somebody who's an athlete, an Olympic rower, or somebody that's trying to make money at what they do athletically, and you put them into a program that looks like nothing but bilateral hip hinging in a sagittal plane. and it doesn't fit within the model of what you need. Now all of a sudden you see limitations, and we have to start working outside of it. And I think what we saw was, and we had people, because the entire CrossFit football thing was a massive test. The warm-ups were tests. The banded resisted sprints. Any of you guys here did the banded resisted sprints? Okay, that was a test to see who could get hip extension, who understood about putting their foot in the ground and understand about big violent arm action and this. I mean, that was a 100% a test to see what kind of athlete you were. And the people that were big, strong athletes blew through that. The people that couldn't just stood in place and lifted their feet off the ground. So everything we were doing was using it as a testing model, and then trying to show people, like, these people can do this, you can't do this, and it was kind of a, instead of being like, it's okay, we know, but we were just fucking firing people's faces.
Remember that when a lot of this, we'll call it peak fitness, began. So we'll just around 2000, the internet's starting to rear its head. We're starting to be conscious. Pavel's writing. We're starting to see more books out, right? Still, fitness in its nascent phase. When I opened the gym in San Francisco in 2005, we couldn't buy a kettlebell in San Francisco. Just let that sink in for a second. Couldn't buy a kettlebell. We had to drive to Santa Cruz to buy kettlebells. Now you can get a kettlebell at Target. So something has changed.
Or Amazon delivers it to your house.
That's right. You don't even have to be strong enough to deliver it to your house.
Yeah, they just deliver it.
When we were using fitness or strength and conditioning principles to solve fitness problems, that looks very different than using strength and conditioning to improve someone's performance in an actual thing. And that gets really lost. And it probably doesn't matter. Let me just say something that's very unpopular here. Squatting is a low power movement. It doesn't matter. You can turn your feet out and slam your knees in and collapse your arches. But as soon as you go fast or change direction or want to apply that to anything you give a crap about, that foot position really starts to matter, and your technique matters because it falls apart at speed. So simultaneously, we're fighting a battle of, hey, this works really well to get people fitness. And as long as you do more work and you can do some squats and become metabolically sensitive, that's fit. And that was a great goal. But it really did forget of the idea of transferability. And you can see that so much of what we talk about, even though we use slightly different language, it's always about, does this skill transfer to, does it make me a better player? We look at, sports preparation training as different than GPP. GPP can be more sophisticated than fitnessing. We can start to actually be under load. But sports preparation means we start to care about the details of transferability. And that's the difference between GPP for fitness and sports preparation. Sports specific training is, the goal is to only make my swimmers swim faster during the season. And that looks maybe different than the sports preparation phase, when I care about more things. I'm rebuilding capacities. I'm basically building a credit that I'm going to work through until the end of the season. And then I'm going to go back to sports preparation. But sports specific training, the only goal is to win. Can my daughter play better water polo? Again, that looks very different than GPP. The next opportunity we have, because that was a real fight that we were fighting. We're like, hey, this doesn't work when we actually needed to go do something with this. Besides, I'm fitter. I did more pull-ups for you in a minute. I'm obviously, pull-ups are a really crappy sport. Yeah, they really are.
Well, I mean,
name the world champion in masters and pull-ups. You can't even. You don't even know who that person is. What I just want to say is that the issue, thank God, the issue now is we are trying to do too many things in the gym. The gym, we got into fitness culture when all you need to do is spend 2 hours a day in the gym, and we forgot about what is the minimum effective dose to go do the sport. And if you spend 2 hours buried in the gym, I've watched this happen recently with some world-class mountain bikers that I work with. They're doing so much in the gym and additional volume that's making their biking worse. How do we evaluate this? Through pain and no pain? No, that's not good enough. Like that, I added another kilo? No. Are you better at the sport? And that was always the heart of CrossFit football. We're preparing athletes to go be athletic, not get fit and win the gym.
Yeah. I mean, the proof is in the pudding every year for me. I would go, they wouldn't give me an off-season workout bonus, which was fucking bullshit. So I left Philly and I would go train with Raph in Tampa, and I would show up. And when we got the new facility, they actually flew me in to do all the training stuff for the TV. And I'm like, so you guys had to bring me in to do the training montage because nobody here was fit enough or had the ability to do fucking 40 dead hang pull-ups or whatever. And they're like, yeah, 100%. So I was training with Roth. They flew me in to fit the montage at the new facility in Philly. And I'm like, this is fucking crazy. But then when we would go back, I would win the conditioning test. I would crush everything. And they asked me, and I'm like, because it's not the same. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but the challenges in terms of like challenging the athletic model, understanding the UAP, moving through space, doing everything to challenge this in different planes of motion and rotation, and then constantly looking for holes. I remember I trained with Roth for a year, and we started doing lunging, but we started doing drunk steps, and we've done like now we call them 30 degrees, but we did drunk steps and open steps. And all of a sudden, like I go do an open step, and I can't lunge with body weight. Like I get lunge in a straight line, and all of a sudden I move my foot. Why? Fucking adductor was messed up. I had no ability to stabilize, and it's like, and then all of a sudden we started doing all these manual resistance protocols, getting things to fire. So it was all about like, and then I remember like year 2 or 3, I was like, hey, what about that stuff we did like 2 years ago? Ralph's like, we don't need to do that stuff anymore. Like, we've already moved past that. Like there's like evolutions in the training. You have to keep progressing it. And it was really interesting when we got to do CrossFit football and we talked to people. People were so content to like follow bedrock. Can I just follow bedrock forever? And I'm like, no, you can't. I'm sorry. You have to move to more advanced training.
No, basic linear progressions for everyone.
Yeah, right. Like it's true. And then all
you
of a
get
sudden,
one, you get one, you get one.
And then all of a sudden, and those of you guys that ran the linear progression when it failed, you were like, oh, and what do I tell you? Put it up on the shelf, maybe give to somebody else, but you don't get it anymore. But that's a lot of this stuff, and what you guys are seeing is more advanced forms of training. The problem is, you know, how like it comes down when you get into more advanced training. It's all super jiggy, but can you do it with perfection? Like I remember we were running with Ralph, and it was like how many like 60s we were going to run. He's like, I think we're going to run one. I'm like, we're going to run one. He's like, let's run one good one, and then if we run good one, we might get a second. And as long as they were good, we kept running up. The minute it got done, we just walk off the field. He was like, that was dog shit. We ain't doing it anymore. And like, we might get one, we might get 10. I didn't know, but everyone had to be perfect. He never timed it. And then all of a sudden, one time I was like, let's fucking line up and let's race. And I almost fucking smoked him. He was running, thought he was there.
He was old. He was much older than you.
Dude, I almost fucking hawked him. And at that point, he's like, well, I'll never fucking race you again. He barely beat me. But that was like really interesting for when we were teaching that deal. There was always this kind of desire to teach a more advanced concept, but realizing that and that's why we started the methodology, because we wanted people to show up educated. When Ralph's over there talking about distal and proximal and rate coding and how eccentric, concentric, and isometric muscle contractions, you're like, holy shit, dude, we could get into such better conversations if people just had the foundation. So that was where the whole methodology and the online stuff came from. And then next thing you know, we ended up breaking up with CrossFit because we had some interesting differences. But it's just allowed us to progress this conversation. And it's true, Kelly let you in, you guys are like a big experiment. The 5,000 people a day that follow training programs are experiments because we're constantly trying, testing and tweaking and seeing how things work. And then we get all this visual feedback through Instagram and DMs, and people send us these training videos and it allows us to coach and make corrections, and then videos, masters of movement. All this is trying to get people to a point where it's not necessarily the training, but it's how well it's executed. Like, is it that constant pursuit of perfection, which I stole from Raphael?
Let me just break down what exercise is in a slightly different way. You need to be able to do what a human being should be able to do. Yes or no, 1 or 0. You put your arm over your head, yes or no. It's not a push and a pull from overhead. You can arrive from overhead from a snatch. You can arrive from overhead from press. You can hang, right? There's a lot of ways to be overhead. You can do downward dog. There's so many overhead. That's just the position. Now, how can I challenge that position? Well, load is the obvious one. I've been doing that forever. Human beings have been like, well, I think I can pick a bigger rock up than you can. Like, that's what we do.
I can floor press more than you.
100%. On that day, when you were on drugs, I cruelly crushed you. What happens when I add cardiorespiratory demand to that? What happens when I add metabolic demand to that? You have to do more than 3. What happens when there's a real competitive drive? I just coached today in front of Chris Duff and John Welbourn. There's no pressure. Don't screw up, Kelly. It's 2 of the best coaches on the planet. It's fine. What happens when we start to add speed to that? And ultimately what you see is, for our hypothesis is, the person who can make the fewest errors or reclaim the best shape that's available to them under the most conditions is the person who can pick up the new skill the fastest, is the best athlete. That person has the most movement choice and create the most movement solution. And that person also tends to be the most athletic and the strongest.
And deal with the most variability that occurs within the arena. And that's really the goal of athleticism, is the million different variables. Can you express that skill? And it's never the same skill. It is, Raider will take 1,000 ground balls. It's never the same ground ball. And is his foot slipping? Is the ball wet? Did he get a bad read or a bad jump? The speed, the hops, all of that. Athleticism gives you variability to express that skill.
And it gives you choice. So ultimately, when you're looking at what are the essential patterns of movements that I need to train? Did I take my shoulder into shoulder extension today? When's the last time I looked at that? Right? Well, what are the different ways I can do that? I can row, I can do chaturanga. If you love to do yoga, that's super cool. You want to bench from that position, you like to dip. Doesn't matter, but if you're not in this shape, if you don't run, you're not going to be able to access what is full power. So ultimately, what's nice about that is that you can then begin to view, just as I gave you an example of the way I look at programming today, is I was like, here's a fundamental shape that I think you need to be in. How are we training that shape? We talked about all the different ways we can expose someone to that shape. So ultimately, we can always use strength and conditioning as the ultimate diagnostic test. If you're this brain, you can see it at speed and understand what needs to be improved. The rest of us are a little slower and a little dumber, and I need to see you get into a lunge-like shape in the gym where I can control the variables to understand what's happening. But it's not enough to just do it. I want to make sure that my athletes can understand the shapes they should be able to hit. And then I can always make it heavy and volume enough and gnarly enough and brutal enough to elicit that mistake. And ultimately, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And we don't expect you not to make mistakes and for people to make compensations or use strategies they've been working for 10 years. Just because that strategy has worked doesn't mean it's the best strategy. And what's nice is now we're suddenly seeing that we have a unified field theory about what the body should be able to do. And then ultimately the tactics that you want to use to train those shapes under speed and under load so they have the most variability is why we end up with a conversation about get the foot straight, and why that was such a poke in the eye for people who are saying, well, we're squatting now, isn't that good enough? We're deadlifting now and hinging now, isn't that good enough? It's not good enough.
Well, one of the things I always like to do is oftentimes coaches will ask me, how do I deal with the complexity of a program of just squatting, stepping up, lunging, and all of these million things we can do. And we always try to break it down into the simplest terms and just saying, I'll ask a coach to say, hey, write down what your athlete would say about you. And everybody would write a sentence. You'd be like, okay, whatever it might be. And I would say, remove the letter S. And then they sit there and erase it. And they go, all you're technically doing is if you just sit there and do not teach a kid, an athlete, a kid, the full alphabet, yes, they can still communicate with you, but is it the smoothest communication? Is it the most eloquent? So all of a sudden, if you are just, me squat heavy, and next thing you know, you're removing some certain vowel or some certain letter, and now the communication is lost. It's still the same vowels. It's still the same consonants. You could take it into the music world. I mean, what's the difference between, it's still the same letters, still the same piano, but what's the difference between somebody who is beautifully amazing versus somebody who's just learning? Same thing with numbers. I mean, it's still 0 through 9. But what you do with those and your command of all of those is really what makes you a good athlete or somebody who's wanting to be a good athlete. And that's how we really explain it to our athletes. And the coaches who are now trying to figure out, why should my athletes not be on the soccer pitch practicing for 4 extra hours and coming into the weight room for 30 minutes, 45 minutes? Or, I mean, I'll tell you right now, it's a double-edged sword. I guess it's not a double-edged sword. What's that mean?
A double entendre?
Yeah. So it's good and bad. Football is fantastic because that's the art of strength and conditioning is football. Yeah. Like you go in and we all love to work out, so that's an easy fix. But now all of a sudden, how do I talk to a baseball coach? because the baseball coach wants his guys out there. He doesn't want them in the weight room. How do I talk to the swimming coach who wants 3 hours a day, 2 days a week, and he's not willing or she's not willing to give up their athletes for 30 minutes, 45 minutes? So how you talk and how you speak from their lens, not your lens as a fire breathing, hard charging, I love to smash weights, but you have to look at it from their lens, and their lens is what they're doing helping them acquire and replicate skill. And if you don't have an answer for that, you're going to lose that battle. So you have to be a little bit more versed in how you're going to talk to those coaches and those parents, because the best athletes, the highest of highest athletes, are who? The ones who train intently, right? It's just a given. Like, okay, I'm doing bench press, I'm thinking about smashing somebody on the field. Whatever the case may be, you pick your sport. Those are the best ones. Well, it's the same exact thing. You have to figure out how you can talk to those athletes, but also be able to talk to the rest of them who might not be a Kobe.
Yeah, no, I keep going back to that. We made a lot of mistakes, I think, in the beginning in terms of like how we didn't take the time to necessarily sell people, because I think people weren't ready for it. And I think now today, and Kelly made a great point, I feel like the nuanced conversation is extended so far that you don't have to explain to people that lifting weights isn't going to stunt their growth. You don't have to explain to people that somebody should have a base level of capacity. You should be able to swing a heavy kettlebell for 30 reps without shitting out your back and feeling like you're going to go into cardiac arrest. So like a lot of these things that we had to argue with early on, now here we are 15 years later, just the fights have been done, and now we're in this nuanced discussion of like more efficient movement. How are people moving? I mean, Kelly getting in there talking about hip extension is funny, because when I think about people missing hip extension, we know it from sprinting. So whereas like Kelly was teaching it, people are talking about missing hip extension in terms of squatting, and I was like, well, if they just stand up, then doesn't it fix that issue? So I know for us, where if we're talking about an athlete missing hip extension, it will use it in the context of sprinting, where you see somebody not coming through this way and they're shorting it, and the reason it could be injury, it could be a million different things. Kelly's actually teaching it in forms of like how you're teaching it today was fascinating, because I hadn't thought about people mistaking standing up with a squat as missing hip extension.
I wish I'd had a mentor. I really do. They don't exist. I have a cabal of coaches who I've been with for decades. I got involved with Chris, watch Chris, obsess Chris. Chris and I text all the time. I have a really like a core group of coaches who I watch and consume everything they do. I watch, I pay attention, and I can always reach out. A lot of you are in a small coaching group, but some of you are sole practitioners, and you're out there by yourself on an island, and that will not work. You need to be around coaches, and you need to be around other people. You need to be coached. One of my favorite things to do is be like, all right, John, what are we doing today? And John was always down to do whatever I wanted. Like, oh, that's what we're doing? Cool. And go get coached. Go be around a bunch of friends, do their programming. It's not going to ruin your squat cycle. I promise to jump in and do a running session with Raph. And what I really want, the reason I have continued to grow and evolve and become, just continue to be interested, is that I'm around really talented coaches, and they are my equals and my peers, and I've sought them out and developed those relationships. I try to understand what the heck is going on. My Instagram feed is floods, lots of natural disasters and floods, lots of raccoons, lots of cats, and so much coaching. Like, I look at so many sports and how people are making the sausage. And I get to sit in on, these really complex, big organizations who are literally at the top of the field and listen to their problems. And I really try to think, how would I solve that? What tools would I have? How would I bring different perspective? What are they doing right? And what that does is it means I basically make a hypothesis every day with the athletes I'm working with, and then I test that hypothesis. Mm-hmm. My workout is an experiment, and it's an experiment on a small group of people that I'm testing. Your experiment with John was we're going to see if we can pull off one great 60, you integrating the things we talked about. And you're like, oh, hey, we passed that. Or the experiment failed and I need to go figure out why John can't do what we're asking him to do. So when you start opening up that mindset and removing your ego a little bit, suddenly you'll realize you collect really good coaches who are in your cadre, who you will lean on and continue to grow with for decades, literally decades. And second, look at this as you are not there for the athlete. That is horseshit. They are there for you. They are there for you to understand your coaching, your communication, your ability to get to the point faster, and they'll give you that feedback. But every group I work with, they're always there for me. And that's what keeps me so interested. What am I seeing today? How can I take that information back and do a better job? I taught 3 sessions back to back to back. Were each session the same?
No.
I got better and better. Whoever's in the first group, I'm so sorry. I was super sucky today. But the third session, nailed it. And that's because I'm looking at, hey, I'm going to move that around. I should have done this different. And I really have no problem tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding it. And so that keeps me intellectually very, very interested. And I just want to point out that really these guys are so much part of my DNA, the way I think and perceive the world. And I'm proud of that. Show your associations, but really build yourself a coaching crew.
So when before I met Kelly, somebody sent, I can't remember who showed me the video, but Kelly had this really awful YouTube video, and it was called Throwing Grace. And what they had done is they found a sand pit. They had 135 pounds in the bar. They were cleaning it and then throwing it as far as they could.
You never thought about that, did you?
In the sand pit. And I saw,
the sand pit out.
yeah, it was one of those things I saw that I was like, man, this is one, this looks like fun, I want to do this, but 2, this person's looking at it in a different way because he's obviously, like think about getting some form of extension, catching, and then being a hop, and then actually vertical, or I guess you'd say it's sagittal displacement instead of jerking it overhead, but throwing it for distance and trying to gather yourself, and I was like, man, that's really smart. Like that was something that we hadn't thought about, and I was like, shit, I want to try it. And we went out and tried it. Went to the beach, brought weights, and we did it. And then I hit him up, and when I met him, I was like, man, that was really insightful. That was something that I saw I hadn't thought about, and I went and replicated. And I was like, I don't know how this is necessarily going to pay dividends, but it's something outside of the realm. And I think what's so neat now with different coaches and social media, there's a lot of bullshit. Like a lot of stuff I see just hurts my head. But on occasion, you see stuff, and you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like Cal Dietz spoke, was it 2 years ago? You guys were at the symposium, and like the reactive stuff he was doing and the triphasic and focusing on these different endpoints, really, really cool within the training, and gave me ideas on a power athlete version that we worked on. Chris and I tested that we've used on the programs, and now we've tested new ways. And whenever I rap with Cal, he's like, "How did that work? Did you like this? Did you do this?" And it's helped us be able to bring a little bit of his stuff into our setting because his stuff is so specialized in that way. But when you look and you see stuff, you have to be able to discern like genius versus fucking dog shit. And most of it's awful, but on occasion you see stuff and you're like, shit, man, that's really good. Like I can use that. This is a problem that my people are having that this person has solved. So like, and what I think happens so often with coaches is they want to think like I invented everything. Whereas you'll hear me and be like, I'll tell you exactly where I got that from. And I got it from this because I saw this, and I'm not going to waste the time to go reinvent my own wheel. If Kelly's already solved something, I call him up, I'm like, Kelly, I like, what do you think's going on here? He's like, I did this. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to be like, yo, this is great. I didn't invent this. I got it from Kelly because I stand on the shoulders of giants. Same with Raph. We start talking about like, everybody's like, God, I didn't know when you squatted, your knees were supposed to go over your toes, and all I do is do this. When you sprint, your knees over your toes, and you have this positive shin angle, toe up. So like in essence, the most basic movement in our basic greatest form of displaying athleticism, which is sprinting, puts you into this position. So wouldn't you want to do something that challenges that position at some point? And like these are simple, and people hear it and they're like, oh, well, of course. Like knees over toes guy is doing some great stuff, but he didn't invent knees over toes. We've been doing this for years. I mean, he brought it to light, but it just showed that like there was people that didn't think you were supposed to squat with your knees over your toes.
Look at Ben's work this way. If your ankles don't flex and you stop at 90 degrees because you can't have come forward bilaterally and you then hinge over, what are you not doing? You're never ever touching certain ranges.
Yep.
What did Ben do? Just regress that back.
Yep.
Look at every exercise and ask, can that continually be loaded? What is the world record for an elevated split squat? Right? There's no world record. That's
400 pounds.
That's terrible.
500, 600, 700.
What is the world record for a slant forward squat? Anyone? You don't do that at those levels, right? So suddenly what you realize is, okay, this is a tool that is going to end its utility at some point.
But what he
That
did
doesn't
is
mean it's not a tool.
he assessed a problem and he fixed it. You guys are going to go in your same situation. And you're like, man, these people are all missing ankle flexion. What's something that I can force them into a position and get their knees over their toes? Oh shit, if I elevate their heels on a slant board, now all of a sudden what I've done is I've got them into the right position, but I'm not going to just stay there. Right. Eventually, what we have to do is we have to keep working this down to develop more flexion in the ankle, so they can get into this position in a flat-footed deal, because they're not going to be running around in high heels. Like I'm not lining up in a set of lifts in my football shoes because I got to get positive shin angle. So like seeing these individuals, and people are solving all these problems, but realizing that the problem, like they're providing you an avenue to solve a problem. It's not the fucking panacea. Oh, we should all squat with our heels elevated. What if you can't? Or what if you don't have that aspect? So I think there's some really interesting stuff, and I think what we're all talking about is, assessing problems, finding people that have solved them, taking that information, bringing it in, using it on your athletes, seeing how it works, deciding if you like it or not, and then moving on to solve the next problem. Because you guys are going to have it. And then eventually every athlete walks in, and we saw this when across the football, everybody came in with the same dysfunctions. To the point where we're like, shit, this is weird. Like, why is everybody having the same problems? Because they're all following the same model. And then you got to go back and create a different model. And then when you create the different model, you put them side by side, and you're like, okay, the people that follow this can do this. These people can't do this. I think we're going to go in this direction. And and there's so much opportunity. Like, you guys don't have to go out and it's as easy as sending an email, a text, a DM, or reaching out and being like, hey man, like I have this kid, he can't get his hand over his head. What do you think he's doing? Or more importantly, how do I fix this? I had the same thing. Now let's get into this and fix this. And it could be neurological, it could be anything. And there's things to fix all of this. Like all of the accentuated negative stuff that we did with Raph and the shoulders and all that, like that fixed so much dysfunction. We just can't necessarily film it because one, you need a partner, and two, we have to teach you how to do it because we don't want you to fuck people up because we fucked ourselves up. So like there's solutions for stuff. I think you're only limited by your creativity and more importantly, your network. And that's
your level of courage to address that problem. I mean, I will tell you now, as a 5'8", 170-pound Filipino guy trying to talk to some of the biggest people in the world, like that took a lot of courage when I first started. I remember speaking at big conferences. I was like, hey guys, I think we're squatting too much. I think we need to do a little bit more lunging and step-ups. And I remember to this day, half of the room just walking out. And it was an interesting battle. But I stuck it out, and the goal, what I'm trying to tell you, is just be courageous enough to learn, figure out, address what the problem is, and then to go after and try to learn, dealing with your own research and resting on some of the work that some really fine people have done, and then just having the courage to do it. To be able to put that foot out there and say, hey, I recognize a problem and I'm going to, so like Chris talked about, is I recognize a problem and I'm going to go out and I'm going to solve this problem. And you're going to take a lot of slack. I mean, we took a ton of it, like a ton. It was...
I'm so sad we didn't have a podcast back then.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have done a podcast after every event we did, talking about it, so we had a way to chronicle it. What's so cool now is if I have a question on anything, like, it doesn't matter what it is, like I can get on, like normally I would just search Rob Wolf's name with it because Rob did a podcast because he had him forever. Like any nutrition stuff, you put Rob's name, it'll be a podcast. But like think about like the amount of information that you have access to, that I can, we were talking about Aaron Rodgers and Joe Rogan and that deal. Like the fact you get to sit in and listen on that conversation. Aaron's a Cal guy, go Bears. But like there's so much information that I think we're actually in a point now where wading through it has become the challenge. Whereas like before I felt like we had like headlamps on and we were searching for shit. Now I feel like it's like walking into those like dollar stores at like 2 a.m. after you've had a couple beers and being like, why is it so bright in here? What is all this shit? It's all $1? Where like you don't know. And that's the only analogy I give to people. I'm like, and you got like, as I paint this this image, you're like, holy shit, walking into a dollar store, like you see the bright lights, it's all this shit, it's all $1, and you don't know where to look, or more importantly, is this stuff? So you just turn around and walk out. But that's what I feel like, because there's so much information. So finding people that are trusted within the network. I mean, I brought these guys here, one, because selfishly I like to see my friends, but two, they're the smartest people I know. And why wouldn't I introduce them to the other coolest people I know that actually own blocks, right? Every one of you guys has a block, right? Okay. Right? You're like, I made those. I didn't give them away. You guys had to fucking come and steal them from me because I collect them, I hoard them. So, dude, well, we're going to wrap this up because we got more to get to. But thank you to Mr. Kelly Starrett, Mr. Raphael Ruiz for coming up and sitting here with me and helping me create all this and still being my friends after 15 years. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.